During our divorce, my son took my ex's side. 5 years later, he came back begging for help, not knowing he was just a pawn in her plan. My name is Mark. I'm 49. When my wife Sarah, 46F, and I split 5 years ago, it was the kind of divorce that makes headlines in small towns. Nasty, public, and full of dirty laundry. We had been married for 20 years, built a life together, raised our son, Jake, who was 18 at the time. I thought we were solid, even if the passion had long since fizzled out. I never saw it coming when I found out about our affair. The first hint was a forgotten phone on the kitchen counter, a message popping up from some guy named T. I brushed it off at first. I wasn't the jealous type. But the messages kept coming. Late-night whispers, secretive smiles, a sudden obsession with her appearance. You'd have to be a fool not to notice. And I'll admit, I played the fool for a while. When I finally confronted her, she didn't even deny it. She just stood there, arms crossed, her eyes cold and unapologetic. I deserve to be happy, Mark, she said, like I was some kind of anchor around her neck. I moved out that same night, dragging my suitcase down our front steps while she watched from the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm, yellow light of the life I thought we'd built together. Jake didn't say a word, just stood there on the stairs, his face blank, his loyalty already picked. I'll never forget the way he looked at me, like I was the intruder in my own home. For the first few months, I tried to keep things civil, for Jake's sake. I showed up to his graduation, sat alone in the back row while Sarah played the supportive single mom in the front. She even had the nerve to invite T, the guy she'd cheated with, to the ceremony. Some overgroomed, smug-looking bastard in a designer suit who clapped a little too loudly every time Jake's name was mentioned. I felt my blood boil every time I caught a glimpse of his smug grin. When Jake left for college that fall, I figured things would get better. I thought distance would give him time to see things clearly, to remember who had actually been there for him all those years. But if anything, it only made things worse. Calls went unanswered, text ignored. I even drove 3 hours to his dorm one weekend, only to have him send me a one-line text, busy. Maybe next time. I finally gave up trying, convinced that my son had written me off for good. I poured myself into work, took every overtime shift I could, scraped together enough to buy a small condo on the other side of town. It was a lonely life, but it was mine. Then, 5 years later, out of the blue, Jake called. I almost didn't recognize his voice at first. It had deepened, roughened with age, the carefree tone of a teenager replaced by something harder, more worn. Hey, Dad, he said, his voice crackling through the line. I need to see you. Can we meet up? My first instinct was to say no, to protect the small, bitter peace I'd carved out for myself. But then I thought about all those years I'd missed, all the chances I'd lost. So I agreed. We met at a little coffee shop on Main Street, the kind with wobbly tables and too loud indie music. Jake was already there when I walked in, sitting by the window, his fingers drumming nervously against the table. He'd grown taller, broader in the shoulders. He looked like a man, not the skinny kid I used to coach in Little League. He stood up when he saw me, a stiff, awkward half-smile on his face. Hey, Dad. Jake, I replied, forcing a small smile as I slid into the seat across from him. The awkwardness hung between us, thick and uncomfortable. For a minute, neither of us spoke. I sipped my coffee, watching as he fidgeted with the edge of his sleeve, his eyes flicking to the window like he was already looking for an escape. Finally, he cleared his throat, his voice low. Listen, I know I haven't been around. And I know I should have reached out sooner. I just nodded, my jaw tightening. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. But, he continued, his fingers still twitching, Mom's in trouble. And I don't know what to do. I felt my shoulders tense. I hadn't heard from Sarah in years, hadn't even bothered to keep track of her after the divorce was finalized. The last I'd heard, she and T had moved in together, bought a house, and were playing house like nothing had ever happened. What kind of trouble? I asked, keeping my voice even. He hesitated, his eyes dropping to the table. Financial. Big time. She needs money, Dad. A lot of it. I felt a bitter, cynical laugh rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Of course she did. Of course the woman who had torn my life apart, ruined our family, and turned my son against me would come crawling back the moment things got rough. And she sent you to ask me? I said, unable to keep the sharp edge out of my voice. Jake's jaw tightened, a flash of anger in his eyes. No, she doesn't even know I'm here. I didn't know who else to turn to. I leaned back, crossing my arms. All right, Jake. I'll listen. But I want the full story. No more secrets. He hesitated, his eyes flicking back to the window. For a moment, I thought he might decide this was a mistake. But then he took a deep breath, met my eyes, and leaned in. Okay, Dad. Here's the truth. It's T, he said, his voice low. He's gone. I blinked, the words not quite registering. Gone? What do you mean gone? Jake leaned in, his eyes flicking around the coffee shop as if he expected someone to be listening. I mean, he disappeared, packed a bag, cleared out his bank accounts, and vanished. Mom woke up one morning, and he was just gone. I felt a slow, bitter smile creep onto my face. It shouldn't have made me happy to hear it, but damn if it didn't feel like karma finally swinging back in my favor. I leaned back, crossing my arms. So he ran out on her. Sounds like she picked the wrong guy. Jake shot me a sharp look, his jaw tightening. It's not just that. He took everything, Dad. Wiped out her accounts, maxed out her credit cards, even took the jewelry she'd been collecting. Left her with nothing but the mortgage and a stack of unpaid bills. I felt a pang of something not quite sympathy, but close. I'd been there, after all. I knew what it felt like to have your life turned upside down overnight. She's going to lose the house, Jake continued, his voice strained. She's got maybe 2 months before the bank takes it. She's already sold off her car, pawned anything she could, but it's not enough. I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. And you're here because… What? You want me to bail her out? He flinched, his eyes dropping to the table. No, not exactly. I thought you should know. I thought maybe. I don't know. Maybe you could talk to her. Help her figure something out. I leaned in, lowering my voice. Jake, you know she wouldn't piss on me if I was on fire. Why would I help her now? He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Because, Dad, it's not just about her. It's about me, too. I felt my brow furrow, a slow, creeping suspicion settling in my gut. What do you mean? Jake's eyes flicked up to meet mine, and I saw the fear there, the same fear I'd seen when he was a little kid, scared of the dark, convinced that monsters lived in his closet. She got me involved, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. T didn't just run off with her money. He took mine, too. I sat back, my eyes narrowing. What do you mean, your money? You're a college kid. What kind of money did you have for him to take? Jake's face flushed, a dark, angry red. More than you think. I've been working, saving, trying to build something for myself. But when Mom started talking about investing, about making our money work for us, I thought she knew what she was doing. I felt my stomach drop, the pieces starting to click into place. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a near growl. How much, Jake? How much did you give them? Jake's face flushed, his jaw tightening, his eyes dropping back to the table. He hesitated, his fingers clenching into fists. 35,000, he whispered, his voice tight. Every cent I saved from summer jobs, internships, everything. And it's all gone. I felt a wave of anger crash over me, my hands curling into fists under the table. I wanted to reach across and shake him, to demand how he could be so damn stupid, how he could fall for the same lies his mother had once used to ruin my life. But then I saw the shame in his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged, the way his hands trembled, and I forced myself to stay calm. He was my son, after all. And despite everything, despite the years of silence and anger, I still loved him. So, I said, my voice colder than I'd intended, you came here hoping I'd fix this for you. Is that it? He flinched, his head snapping up, his eyes wide, desperate. No, I don't want your money, Dad. I just don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about betrayal, about the tangled mess of lies and manipulation that had shattered our family. And for the first time in years, I saw a chance to finally set things right. All right, I said, my voice steady. All right, Jake. I'll help you. But if we're doing this, you need to be honest with me. No more secrets. He gave a slow, reluctant nod, his eyes still clouded with doubt but also something else, something like hope. Okay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay, Dad. No more secrets. I straightened, my mind already turning over possibilities, strategies, ways to dig them both out of this mess. But even as I plotted my next move, I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that there was more to this story than Jake was letting on. And as he looked down at his shaking hands, his jaw still tight, I realized I might be walking into a trap of my own. This was a full-blown scam, and my son had walked right into it. All right, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. Tell me exactly how this happened. Jake looked down, his jaw clenching, his hands still shaking slightly. It started last year. T told Mom he had a business opportunity, some kind of investment thing. He said he had connections, that he knew how to make big returns if we just put some money in. At first, it was just a few thousand here and there, but then he started talking about doubling our money, tripling it if we got in early. I felt a bitter taste rise in my throat. I'd seen this scam before, back in my construction days. Fast-talking guys with flashy cars, selling dreams that never materialize. I'd warned Jake about people like this, taught him to be careful, to trust his gut. But it seemed like he'd inherited more of his mother's blind faith than my caution. So you handed over your savings, I said, my voice sharp, unable to keep the frustration out of my tone. You gave it all to him? Jake flinched, his face flushing a deeper red. Not at first. But T was convincing. He showed us spreadsheets, profit charts, even brought over a guy who claimed he'd made 6 figures through T's connections. And Mom, she just kept pushing, kept saying it was our ticket to a better life. I felt my jaw tighten, the anger simmering just below the surface. Of course she had. Of course Sarah, who had blown through every cent I'd ever saved, who had taken the house, the car, and half my retirement, would jump at the chance to play investor with my son's money. What happened then? I pressed, my voice colder now. Jake rubbed a hand over his face, his shoulders slumping. At first, the returns were real. T would hand us envelopes of cash every few weeks, just like he promised. A few hundred here, a few thousand there. It felt good. Like I was finally doing something smart with my money. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Then, about 6 months ago, the payment stopped. T said it was just a temporary slowdown, that the market was correcting itself. Mom believed him. She even put in more money, pulled from her own accounts. Said we just needed to ride it out. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. I could picture it all too clearly. Sarah, desperate to cling to her new life, throwing good money after bad, dragging Jake down with her. And when did you figure out it was a scam? I asked, leaning in. Jake's face darkened, his jaw tightening. About a month ago. I tried to pull my money out, asked T to cut me a check. He stopped answering my calls, blocked me on social media. I tried going to his house, but it was empty. The neighbors said he'd moved out in the middle of the night. I felt my stomach drop. This was worse than I'd thought. If T had skipped town, there was a good chance the money was already gone, funneled into offshore accounts or blown on fast cars and fast women. And your mother? I asked, my voice low. Did she know? Jake's hands tightened into fists, his knuckles white. I don't know. She's been acting weird, paranoid. I caught her shredding documents a few days ago, and when I asked her about it, she just snapped, said it was none of my business. I leaned back, feeling a fresh wave of anger and frustration wash over me. Sarah might be a lot of things, but she wasn't stupid. She had to know this was a scam. She had to know she'd dragged her own son into a sinking ship, and now she was trying to cover her tracks. All right, I said, my voice tight. We're not going to panic. We'll figure this out. But you need to be straight with me, Jake. I need to know everything. He looked up, his eyes glassy, his jaw still tight. That's it, Dad. That's all I know. I'm broke. She's broke. And I don't know what the hell we're supposed to do now. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't just about money. This was about saving my son from a mess his mother had dragged him into, about cutting through years of lies and manipulation. Okay, I said, leaning in. First thing tomorrow, you and I are going to the bank. We're going to pull whatever records we can, see if there's any chance of recovering your money. And then, I paused, my jaw tightening. Then we're going to have a little talk with your mother. Jake's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of fear crossing his face. He gave a slow, shaky nod. All right, Dad, he whispered. All right. I leaned back, feeling a grim sense of purpose settle in my chest. I'd lost my wife, my home, and for a long time, my son. But if I had a chance to fix even a piece of this mess, I was damn well going to take it. The next morning, Jake and I met at the bank, a squat brick building with a faded blue awning that hadn't been updated since the early 90s. Jake looked nervous, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, his eyes darting around like he expected T to jump out from behind a potted plant. We sat down with a banker named Lisa, a middle-aged woman with short, graying hair and a tired smile. I explained that we needed to pull the full transaction history for Jake's accounts, and she nodded, typing rapidly into her computer. All right, she said, glancing over her glasses at Jake. I'll need your ID and a signature, and then I can print the records for you. Jake fumbled with his wallet, his hands still trembling slightly. I watched as he slid his driver's license across the desk, his jaw tightening as Lisa scanned it. Just a moment, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she clicked through a few more screens. I saw her brow furrow, her fingers freezing on the keyboard. Is something wrong? Jake asked, his voice tight. Lisa looked up, her face suddenly tense. Mr. Carson, did you authorize a wire transfer to an offshore account 2 weeks ago? Jake's eyes went wide, his mouth dropping open. What? No. I didn't authorize anything. Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flicking between us. Well, according to our records, a wire transfer of $35,000 was processed from your account to a bank in the Cayman Islands. It was flagged for verification, but someone called in and confirmed it. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. I leaned in, my voice sharp. Someone called in? Who? Lisa hesitated, her eyes flicking to Jake. The call came from your registered home phone number, and the caller correctly answered all the security questions. I glanced at Jake, his face ashen, his hands shaking again. Mom, he whispered, his voice barely audible. It had to be Mom. I felt my stomach drop. Of course. Sarah had access to his information, knew his passwords, his security answers. She'd set him up, drained his account, and then lied to his face about being broke. Can you print those records for us? I said, my voice tight, my jaw clenched. Lisa nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard again. Of course. Give me a moment. As she stepped away to fetch the printouts, I turned to Jake, my eyes hard. You need to tell me everything, Jake. Right now. Has your mother asked you for anything else lately? Any weird requests? Strange questions? He shook his head, his face still pale. No. I mean, she's been acting weird, but I just thought it was stress. She kept talking about how we needed to protect ourselves, how we needed to be ready for anything. I felt a chill run down my spine, my mind racing. Sarah wasn't just trying to cover her tracks. She was setting up a fall guy. She was setting up Jake. Lisa returned a moment later, a thick stack of papers in her hand. She set them down in front of us, her face still tense. Here you go, Mr. Carson. I'm so sorry about this. If you'd like, I can help you file a fraud report. Jake just nodded, his eyes glued to the stack of papers, his face ghostly white. I reached over, flipping through the pages, my eyes scanning the lines of transactions. And then I saw it. Not just the wire transfer, but dozens of smaller withdrawals, each one timed perfectly with the payments Jake said T had been making. I leaned back, my mind spinning. This wasn't just a scam. This was a setup. T had been siphoning money from Jake's account for months, likely with Sarah's help, using their own son as a shield while they drained his savings dry. I looked up at Jake, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake, listen to me. Your mom wasn't just scammed. She was in on this. She's been using you to cover her tracks, to keep the money flowing while she set up her escape. Jake's mouth dropped open, his eyes wide with shock. No, she wouldn't do that. She wouldn't betray me like that. I felt my jaw clench, the old, familiar anger flaring up again. Jake, think about it. She had access to your accounts. She had your passwords, your security answers. She knew everything about you, and she used it to drain your money. That's not just betrayal. That's a setup. He shook his head, his hands trembling. No, she wouldn't do that. I leaned in, my voice low and firm. She would, Jake. And she did. And if we don't act fast, you're going to take the fall for all of this. His eyes filled with tears, his hands curling into fists on the desk. For a long, tense moment, neither of us spoke. I watched as the truth finally crashed down on him, as the years of blind loyalty shattered in an instant. Finally, he looked up, his eyes red, his jaw tight. What do we do? I took a deep breath, the weight of the past 5 years settling onto my shoulders. First, we lock down your accounts. Then we get a lawyer. And then, I paused, my jaw tightening. Then we make sure your mother can't hurt you again. Jake gave a slow, shaky nod, his eyes still clouded with doubt, but something else too, something like resolve. And as we stood up, the papers clutched in my hand, I realized that this wasn't just about fixing my son's mistakes. It was about tearing down the house of lies his mother had built around him. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. The drive to Sarah's house felt longer than usual, the silence in the car thick and suffocating. Jake sat beside me, his hands gripping his knees, his jaw set in a hard line. I could see the betrayal in his eyes, the rage simmering just below the surface. We pulled up to the house, the one I used to mow the lawn for, the one where I'd fixed leaky faucets and painted the deck every summer. It felt like a ghost now, a hollow, empty shell of the life I thought I'd built. The moment we walked in, I could hear the clinking of glass from the kitchen. Sarah was at the counter, pouring herself a drink, her back to us. She didn't even look up when we entered, just tossed the ice cubes into her glass with a little too much force, the sound echoing through the empty house. Mom, Jake said, his voice low, tight. She froze, the glass halfway to her lips. For a moment, she just stood there, her shoulders stiff, her knuckles wide around the glass. Then she turned, a forced smile spreading across her face. Oh, she said, her voice a little too bright. Jake. Mark. This is a surprise. Jake stepped forward, his fists still clenched. Cut the crap, Mom. We know. Her smile flickered, her eyes darting to me, then back to Jake. Know what, honey? I don't know what you're talking about. I stepped up beside Jake, dropping the stack of bank records onto the counter. The papers fanned out, the wire transfer highlighted in angry yellow. Care to explain this? I said, my voice sharp. Her eyes dropped to the papers, her face draining of color. For a split second, I saw a flicker of fear, but she quickly masked it, straightening up, her lips pressing into a thin line. Jake, I don't know what this is, she said, her voice trembling just a little. There must be some kind of mistake. Jake's jaw tightened, his fist shaking. Don't lie to me, Mom. You used my account to funnel money to T. You drained everything I had. She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the door, the faintest hint of panic flashing across her face. Jake, please, you don't understand. It's not what you think. I stepped in, my voice cold, unrelenting. Then explain it, Sarah. Tell us why you stole from your own son. Why you set him up to take the fall for your little scheme. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. I could hear the tick of the old kitchen clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. Then, finally, she broke. All right, fine, she snapped, slamming her glass down on the counter. Yes, I took the money. Yes, I used his account. But you don't get it, Mark. You never did. Jake took a step back, his face pale, his hands still shaking. What the hell does that mean? She let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through her hair. It means T wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my partner. We were planning to run, to start over, to leave all this behind. But then he screwed me over. He took the money and ran. Jake's face twisted in shock, his fist clenching tighter. You were going to leave me behind? Sarah flinched, the mask slipping for just a moment, a flash of guilt crossing her face. No, I was going to bring you with me. But you weren't supposed to find out like this. I felt my jaw tighten, my fist clenching at my sides. So you were going to disappear, drain your son's savings, and leave him holding the bag when the police came knocking? Real mother of the year stuff, Sarah. She shot me a venomous glare, her eyes sharp, defiant. Don't you dare judge me, Mark. You left us. You walked out. I did what I had to do to survive. I felt my blood boil, the years of resentment and betrayal crashing down on me all at once. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Survive? You've been living off his money, using him as a pawn, setting him up to take the fall for your crimes. That's not survival, Sarah. That's betrayal. She opened her mouth to fire back, but Jake cut her off, his voice trembling, his eyes glassy. You're a monster, he whispered, his voice cracking. You used me. You lied to me. I was just a tool to you. Sarah's face twisted, her eyes filling with tears, but I could see the life forming behind them, the desperate attempt to spin this back in her favor. Jake, baby, please, she said, stepping toward him, her hands reaching out. We can fix this. We can still make this right. He took a step back, his eyes hard, his jaw tight. No, he said, his voice low, cold. You can't fix this. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, the front door slamming behind him. I watched him go, my heart aching, my fist still clenched. I turned back to Sarah, my jaw set, my eyes hard. You just lost the only person who still cared about you, I said, my voice sharp, final. And you deserve every bit of what's coming next. She just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. I turned and followed my son out the door, letting it slam behind me. I caught up to Jake in the driveway, his shoulders slumped, his head down. He leaned against my car, his fist still trembling, his jaw tight. I could see the weight of it all crashing down on him, the betrayal, the lies, the years of misplaced loyalty. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. Jake, I said, my voice steady. Do you want to press charges? We can make sure she pays for this. She deserves to. He hesitated, his eyes fixed on the cracked asphalt beneath his feet. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just let the silence stretch between us, the cool evening air settling around us like a heavy blanket. Finally, he shook his head, his shoulders sagging, his fist slowly unclenching. No, he said, his voice rough, tired. I just want to move on. I don't want to see her again. I don't want to hear her voice. I'm done. I felt a mix of relief and sadness, the last remnants of my anger slowly fading. I gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. All right, then let's go. Let's get out of here. He looked up at me, his eyes still red, but a little clearer now, a little more focused. He gave a small, shaky nod. Yeah, let's just go. I unlocked the car, and we climbed in, the engine rumbling to life as I pulled out of the driveway, leaving the house behind us. Jake stared out the window, the darkened silhouette of his mother's house shrinking in the rearview mirror. As we turned onto the main road, I felt a strange, bittersweet sense of relief. I'd lost my marriage, my home, and nearly my son. But as I glanced over at Jake, his jaw still tight but his shoulders a little less tense, I realized I hadn't lost everything. Jake was still here. And this time, I wasn't going to let him go.